I kind of want to open with a burning question that kind of harks back to your earlier career, because there is news brewing that ABC is developing a new series. It's going to be a female version of Magnum PI, and I kind of wanted to get your take on it. Female because there is a female Magnum from the story of the show, the character of the daughter Lily. They're going to build it around, and I wonder what your take on that is.
I don't have much of a take. I think you know more than I do. Whoever came up with it hasn't called or written.
Not a bit, really?
I don't know what it's about. Magnum has a lot of sides to it. I hope they understand that and aren't just buying a title to do bigger explosions or change gender. That being said, I don't wish anybody in this business of a high rate of failure ill, so I hope they do well.
Well, I hope so too. I hope they also call you at some point. That seems really wrong for them to cut you out of the process.
I hope she has a French accent, because she does.
Okay, well, we'll keep that in mind. But how does it make you feel as well, knowing that it still stays so much in the culture that they would want to revisit a name as iconic as Magnum?
I'm very proud of Magnum. I never mind talking about it. You know, it was a show that we fought for some things, not because the message is more important than the obligation to entertain, but in 1980, I'm very proud of the fact that Vietnam and the subject and the people who fought the war weren't very popular. Almost, not universally, but it was kind of the tenor of the times. I'm very proud that Don Belisario, who put flashbacks from Vietnam and made it a part of the character, and I also fought, because Universal said, and CBS said, the flashbacks were great in the 2-hour movie. They got to go away. Vietnam's got to go away. It's death. And we said no. And we weren't a success yet. So, long story short, in the 8th season of Magnum, they put my silly Hawaiian shirt and my Detroit Tiger hat in the ring in the Smithsonian and recognized this as the first show, I don't want to get emotional, to recognize Vietnam veterans in a positive light.
Oh.
So.
Well, given the fact that that this may come to pass on ABC, but there was a period of time when you were very adamant of trying to get a movie or some kind of a sequel done with Tom Clancy, I believe. An idea was floating
about
around,
the time Tom Clancy did Red October, everybody was trying to get him to do a movie, and I had met Tom, and he was a huge Magnum fan, and he said he was going to do the story. And so we had Tom Clancy, who nobody could get, and I went to Universal and said, I think it's time we revisit this character. I certainly had a 4-picture deal going at Disney, so I was viable, but they said no. It was during a change in ownership, which Universal had about 3 at that time. I don't think anybody could make up their mind, but I've always considered it a missed opportunity.
Well, if they give you the opportunity, if this sequel were to happen and said they would kind of want Dad to show up, would you consider doing something like that if it worked out in your schedule?
It would depend on the spirit of the show.
Okay.
If they want to trivialize it or do big explosions, no. And I'm not going to bless it by doing a cameo, because they give you some money.
Okay, fairly good, fairly good. Well. Given the audience for SAG-AFTRA, there are some questions that tend to be asked in these forums, and they're sort of dealing with the actor's life to some extent. And one of the questions would be, given that it took a while for Magnum to happen for you, and how did you know all through that time? What kept you going? How did you know that the actor is what you wanted to be, that when you were doing the commercials, and you had a succession of unsold pilots, I believe, as well, right?
I did 6 unsold pilots.
Do you remember any of them?
Actually, I remember all of them.
Yeah.
Because one of them actually sold, a series with Robert Stack and an old friend of mine, Shelley Novak. It sold, and I was about the 6th banana in it, and my agent was out of town, and I knew better than to celebrate, but I got a message, yes, it's sold. And so, I picked up a couple dinner tabs that I probably couldn't afford. And made the mistake of celebrating, at which point a very nice man, John Wilder, who wrote the pilot, but it was going to have nothing to do with the series. He said, look, I'm calling you. It's not my job. I'm not in the show anymore, but you're not going to be in it. They wrote you out. So that was right before Magnum. I figured I was going to get a shot at that point. That was a little hard to take. But everybody has those stories. Long story short, it's a blessing. I was doing commercials and getting by. Sometimes I collected unemployment. I also worked in a clothing store selling clothes. But when I was 25, I looked 35 and sounded 15. And I'm not sure. I kept getting hired. They want me for bit parts where you're this big 6'4" guy who walks in a room and usually he's an idiot, an ass. And I wasn't real good at that first impression stuff because I have slightly different appetites, which I think Magnum demonstrated. So it was a blessing. It was frustrating. I was 35 when I got Magnum. And then it was a show that was assigned to me. I had done 2 pilots for Steve Cannell after that failure I talked about. And
You had been on Rockford at some point.
I had been on Rockford. Well, I hadn't been on it yet.
Okay.
Steve wrote those out of guilt because those 2 pilots are the only 2 pilots up to then that Steve wrote that didn't sell.
Good grief.
So anyway, he wrote this great part in Rockford for Lance White, the perfect detective who was an idiot. And I got my dose of, he's gone now, Jim, but he hated when I called him a mentor, but he was.
Is that right?
And so when Magnum came along, those 2 pilots were the deal at Universal. It was over, and they assigned a show called Magnum to me. And I said, let me see it. You can't do that. My deal's over. And they said, oh, well, we found a technicality where we could extend you if you worked at other studios, so yes, we can. I read it and I hated it.
It wasn't the same Magnum that you end up playing.
It was
right?
a James Bond type character who owned the Ferrari and had a stewardess on each arm. You can't call him that anymore, I know, but at the time you could. I said, I'd never had a show on the air, but I figured, it's about time. So I'm sitting with Garner doing Rockford in his truck because he drove me in his little van to the next location. We were way ahead of the company, and he says, you look bothered, because we were talking a lot by then. And I said, well, Universal, which he had no real love for, even though he worked there. You know the story.
He took his lumps. Yeah, he surely did. Yeah.
I said, they assigned this show to me, and I hate it. And he said, look, I'm not going to give you advice, but I'll tell you this. He said, if they want you, I know you haven't been on the air, but if they want you, you'll never have more power than you do right now. And he said, if it's a success, if it goes on the air, you won't have any power. Maybe in 3 years you might. So he said, if you feel like making a stand, that's all I'm going to tell you. So I said, no. And the studio said, we'll sue you, and who the hell do you think you are? You'll never be on the air. And
Wow.
I said, nobody, but I won't do it. Long story short, I called their bluff, and they said, well, how about if we get a new writer and rethink the show? And I had lunch with Don Belisario, who'd done a couple episodes on spec for the Steve Cannell show that didn't sell. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to do something more like Rockford. And he wrote the best 2-hour pilot movie, or one of the best I've ever seen.
Oh, that is like awesome advice to be given by somebody in James Garner's
I
position.
didn't make it so long, but
Yeah, no,
it
it's
was
great.
it was
It's a great
it was
story.
fundamental and obviously a big risk. I had a great dad, and who always either said, or maybe he just taught me it by the way he lived, that risk is the price you pay for opportunity, and so I took a risk.
And it certainly paid off. And now we are in the world of Blue Bloods, kicking off season 7. I mean, it's amazing. It's like, how about that? How about that?
I don't know what happened to the time. It seems like we're in about our 3rd year. I'm very proud of the show. I know everybody talks ratings. Yes, we're in the 7th year. We're still growing. Yeah. We had a higher rating in this premiere, the one you saw, than we did last year.
And that bucks industry trends. That doesn't tend to happen for long run.
Well, you know, we've been kind of the little engine that CBS, I think, kind of takes for granted. They put us on Friday night at 10 o'clock. Everybody thought it was the highest testing pilot they had, but they stuck us there, and everybody thought we were doomed. And we kind of said, if you build it, they'll come. And
well, you're kind of keeping the lights on Friday night, really, in terms of
well,
like industry.
Friday night,
yeah.
For those of you who don't know, was the worst night in television, and 10 o'clock is death. 9 o'clock shows are supposed to be the deal, so we didn't mind, and because it is a character-driven show, which is my bent, and I mean, that's why Magnum's still on the air in about 100 countries, other than the shorts, which are a little out of style. It's a character-driven show. It's not about issues or anything else. It's about these people, and because it's about the people, problems of the human condition don't go away, and it still translates.
Yeah, and I thought this was a really strong opener for this season as well, in terms of the way that it sort of restates the themes of what it means and why people go into the police work. And Danny's going through her soul searching. You have the scene with him. You've also got the young man that you've been mentoring and wondering whether you should, so it really kind of gets to the core of the show in many ways.
It gets to the core of the show, I think very much so. I think the show's at its strongest when you get this idea, you got this family business, and at the same time, not in different periods of time or a different day, you see these different worlds. You see Danny's world and Aaron's world and Jamie's world and Frank's world, which is a totally different world. It is something we've worked very hard on. I did a movie called Ike Countdown to D-Day for A&E.
You took your hair off for that one.
I cut my hair off and my mustache and actually dyed it gray. Believe it or not very gray. It's the truth. And it was about the Ike in the months leading up to D-Day. And it was all about command. And I learned a lot. And I don't know whether CBS originally saw it that way. I think they saw me in front of a big green screen with cops running all over the city and me ordering them around. Well, if I can't be the boss, then you hired the wrong guy. That's an accident of nature. But the weight, the sheer responsibility for a character who controls 35,000 lives. While he was commissioner, he lost his son in the line of duty. That weight, which he doesn't like, and he didn't want the job, for those of you who watch the show regularly, we found out more and more about that, is a very hard thing to communicate, and it is a different world from the other world. And you really have to, it's why I love the challenge of playing him so much, because you got to get inside Frank's head or we don't have, that part of the show doesn't work. And if you don't walk in his shoes, it's over. So I thank our writers for willing to take that risk. I thank CBS for not necessarily understanding it right away, because it wasn't safe.
Right.
But it's a real hard challenge, and I really love it.
7 seasons in, are you still finding things out about Frank, finding facets that you're
yeah,
so curious about?
I think we're just starting. As long as you do a show like Magnum, left. It probably could have gone on for about 15 years. We went off the #1 show on the air that
Only
week.
8 seasons. That surprised me when I looked back
Yeah,
to see that.
well,
Yes.
I was in every shot,
Yes.
and thanks. I had done the #1 picture in the world, Three Men and a Baby. I had given them 7 years of a contract and gave them another year, and I said I'll do my best. But I was tired from it, not of it, because it was character-driven. And when you do a character-driven show, which is on network television, that's getting rarer to find, and the character's allowed to grow and change, you never run out of ideas. I would like to say something about, we end up hitting on a lot of issues, but that doesn't drive the show. It is understandable and necessary that we deal with police issues, but we don't do ripped from the headlines. Coincidentally, a lot of shows, because it's so germane to our modern society and what's going on, you'll get this, the theme of the show coinciding with a current issue. Well, you got to remember those scripts were thought of and formed 4 or 5 months before. And issues aren't as important, #1, as the obligation to entertain. #2 is the obligation to your character. So that comes first, but the show becomes sometimes startlingly relevant with some of the tragic stuff that's going on.
And the issues tend to be reflected through the various characters within the family, and because they're coming at it from so many different sides.
Well,
so
it's a police family.
Yeah, sure.
We don't pull punches on their opinions. We don't try to water them down to make it acceptable to everybody. Although I think they're pretty reasonable people, but at the same time, we work very hard. You don't see Frank's adversaries who disagree with him as written so that everything is set up for Frank so he can always win. We try very hard to provide strong characters who present their points of view in very strong ways, and that's, I think, how you get balance. You can't very well say Frank he's a practicing Catholic. I'm not a very religious person. I used to get the cross mixed up because I was baptized Episcopalian, and I grew up in a congregational church, and I go to church not occasionally because that's when my mom wants to go. I go with her. But that being said, it's just all very interesting, and that's who he is, and you got to be loyal to him, not whoever you may be in your private life.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, from the audience, a question coming from someone who describes herself as an Irish Catholic fan named Mary Margaret, and she's asking about, could you please describe your...
I'm open to conversion, Mary.
Awesome. And she asks, could you please describe your experience working with our outstanding NYPD and their role in advising the show?
Well, the biggest and most important advice for me, we have a technical advisor, Jimmy Nusifaro, who's wonderful. He was a decorated detective. He's retired now. I go to him for a lot of stuff, police stuff, but the huge help, I was in a restaurant after I'd already signed on to the pilot, and Bill Bratton was in there.
Right.
Now, he was in between Los Angeles police chief and the commissioner again here, his second round, and you don't interrupt people at dinner. That's if you've been interrupted, you don't do that. So I sent him a note, and he was really helpful. He and Leonard Goldberg and I had dinner. I read his book, which I would recommend to people, called Turnaround, particularly the part where he becomes New York City Police Commissioner. And he's been a help. Look, he's a pretty busy guy. Ray Kelly was very busy at the time. I certainly met him. He came to our pilot screening. So, and those guys are very interesting to me. And when I think our show, Frank talks different when he makes a speech than he's in his office, because he was a beat cop. And I've always wanted to know what happens when the door closes of Bill Bratton's office.
That's awesome.
And the public face goes away, and I think that's what we we try increasingly to do, because I think that's real
Did
interesting.
it help having met him on a personal level to be
Very
able to
much
humanize
so.
the character?
Very much so. And I'd bump into him because we were going to the same restaurant every so often, and it was just useful. And actors watch people a lot. I didn't stare at them. I snuck peeks in a very, very polite way. But he was very helpful. Ray Kelly was active commissioner at the time. He was a little too busy to help some goofy actor
And now
pretend
there's-
he's someone else.
Yeah. And now there's a new guy, James O'Neill. Have you met him?
I may have met him. I don't. I know he's a cop's cop. I know, which is very much like Frank.
Right.
He came up through the ranks, and I know he's liked. And I think that's look. I walk in the commissioner's shoes. I start to understand what it's like to be a commissioner. I'm very proud of what we do, but I'm also very proud of the NYPD. So I think that's a real gift that Bill Bratton got us, a cop who knows what it's like to be a cop and isn't some political figure they brought in to match somebody's political agenda.
And it was amazing to me. His first day on the job ended with the explosions in Chelsea, and it was like,
Yeah.
that sounds like an episode of Blue Bloods to me.
Well, Bratton's book,
Yeah.
Turnaround, his first day on the job was astounding, what happened in this city. That I think is policed, there's mistakes, but is policed pretty well. I think, I'm now biased, but we do shows about the mistakes quite often, and I think that's important too. So.
Well, without flaws, you really don't have drama. So, so that's great. I want to take a little focus onto one of the staples of the show. One of the signature scenes in every episode, basically, is the dinner scene, the family dinner scene, where they all come together and they all hash it out. And I am curious whether you look forward to those scenes or whether you, how do you feel about them when they're coming up in your schedule?
I really look forward to them. I'm not crazy about, once you make a choice of what you eat, you're going to eat it for 8 hours. Because that's about how long it takes to film that many characters in a scene like that. When I got the script, I read it, and it surprised me. It surprised me because it was character-driven in an age of almost total procedurals. I met with Leonard Goldberg, and I said, this family dinner, it was 8 pages long in the pilot.
And it's the
And I
first
said,
scene
I love that scene, but I know what's going to happen. After we say yes, the network's going to, cut it down to 2 minutes and we'll never do it again. He said, no, that's a set piece. That is going to be in every show. This is Leonard. This is right out of Leonard's mind. And he saw a Norman Rockwell painting called Thanksgiving Dinner.
Right.
I think that's the name of it.
Yeah.
And got this idea, what if Thanksgiving dinner was a table full of people in a family business, in this case, the police business and the law enforcement business. So Leonard knew from the very beginning that was going to be in the show. And that 8-page scene didn't get cut. It didn't get cut down. It's the heart and soul of the pilot. The hard part for our actors out there, I got the show, I had about 2 weeks. Some of our other regulars, my sons and daughters, maybe had 2 days. So we shot the beginning in Toronto, some of the interiors, because it's cheaper.
Okay.
And first scene we ever shot for the pilot of this show was family dinner.
That's crazy.
We didn't know each other. I had met Bridget that morning. I think I met Will maybe the night before, and met Donnie 2 days before. And the director had said, I asked him in the beginning, you want me to work on a New York accent? And they went, no. And Leonard goes, no. And the director, Michael Cuesta, said, well, no. Because Leonard said no. And I said, you want me to shave off the mustache? And Michael Cuesta said, yeah, that's great. And I said, you better check with CBS about that. That went away, but that's okay for a cop or police commissioner. And then, and he says, no accent. And then 2 days, Michael didn't understand this. He meant, well, he calls me up and he says, I've changed my mind. This is 2 days before we're going to shoot the thing. He says, I think you ought to try the accent. Well, I don't have a New York accent in the bag. You know, I've done other accents, but it just scared the hell out of me. He said, well, I got a dialogue coach up here. It's just a little lilt to things. And that's all I could think about for 2 days preparing for the show, not what's Frank like, what am I going to do? And I went to him, and Leonard, I said, Michael, we got to talk. I said, I don't mind a challenge, but not 2 days before this thing starts. And I also have seen actors who are pretty well known try and take on something that can be extreme, and whether or not that's accepted is sometimes doubtful. This is your instrument, this is what you work from, but just to prove you can do something might not be the best thing, especially when you're doing a character that the audience has to walk in his shoes right away. They go, well, Tom sounds kind of funny, that's not the way he talks. So it's a balanced thing you do.
Well, in these dinner scenes, you get to interact with everybody, and right now they're playing repeats of the first season in local syndication, and you look back at them. The family has grown. It really is also a chance to reconnect with this family that is now forming on the show, right?
The other thing I was going to say about Family Dinner is you can do a television series like this with a big ensemble, and because of the nature of stories, particularly these different stories, you might not see one of your co-stars for 2-3 weeks because you don't work the same days, you don't work the same hours. You're in a little separate world. I love these people, the actors. I love the characters. Frank loves the characters, but I love these people. And they're terrific actors. They commit to the work, and that's why I think the show is so strong. And it's like every 8 days, other than the eating thing I told you about, every 8 days we have a little reunion. And you know, the table talk, sometimes visitors get a little something they didn't plan on because they're wearing headsets out looking at the monitors. But the table talk is great fun. Sometimes we talk too much and the director can't get our attention to shoot the scene. But
one of our audience members, Julie, has asked about the Sunday dinners, and this is a thing that never really struck my mind. How is it possible that Danny and Jamie are often able to join the family every Sunday when detectives and such often have to work? I mean, how do they get that Sunday
It's been possible. They've been late. They've been early.
Okay.
Frank missed one because his friend was dying. But I think that's the point. Yeah, okay, you can dwell on, well, isn't that kind of impossible? I think everybody who watches the show would like to believe that it's not, that the one thing you don't miss in this family is family dinner on Sunday. Now, some of us had that. I had it when I was very young, but when my brother and sister were born, they were 8 and 10 years younger. Suddenly, there were 2 different worlds, and you didn't do that anymore. Some people had it and still do, and it's reaffirming. Some people never had it and wish they did. Some people never had it and are grateful they didn't when they see some of the fights we had.
Right.
So it's a very kind of galvanizing thing. And at the point where it comes up in most shows, not always, but it is in the third act where the audience is now carrying the secret of knowing what each character separately has been going through. So when a given subject comes up, the audience is kind of in on, ooh, they shouldn't have brought that up. That's not going to sit very well with Danny, or that's not going to sit very well with Frank where he's at. So it's a little, in Magnum, you had the secret of him sharing in narration with the audience. Right. You know, he'd lie to somebody in the scene, and then he'd come out and he'd get in his Ferrari and say, I know what you're thinking, to the audience. Right. I know what you're thinking, I shouldn't have lied. But, that little secret, I think, is a very important element.
Another thing that happened in this episode, they introduced a character played by Lori Loughlin, who clearly you have mentored the son become almost a surrogate father. And the producers, in some interviews, as we have a new season, we always interview the producers of the show. They say, you may not have seen the last of her. And everybody always, almost any given season, we know this isn't a soap opera, but at the same time, they keep thinking, when's Frank ever going to find somebody?
We have a cumulative narrative.
Yeah. Yeah.
Frank got lucky once.
Yeah.
There's a part of Frank who is in the detective genre what we call a man alone. You may think you want to see that. Secondly, Laurie's lovely and a wonderful actress, as you saw. Frank Reagan, who still wears his wedding ring. Look, if he dated somebody, I think he'd be afraid to tell his kids. And they're the ones who say, why doesn't Dad get on with his life? That's an interesting question to go into. If you want to complicate that for Frank, I saw that in an article. And I'm going, well, okay, what is that, a 2-season arc? Because this is one of his best friend's wife. Who, and I don't know, as a guy, when I was younger, and you just, if, no matter how attractive somebody is, if they're connected to a friend, you just shut down that part of your brain. There'd be a long road.
Sure.
But that may be a good writing obstacle, but I don't think you'd see them jumping in the sack in the first show, or maybe their fourth show together.
It's a discreet.
It's an interesting problem. Frank is, I think he's got issues about it now. I don't know what they are. That's one of the great things about a character-driven series. You keep learning stuff about your character the more episodes you do. I had no idea half the stuff about Frank when we started the show.
Season 9, you never know. Exactly. Now, a lot of questions from the audience and myself have questions about another role that you've been associated with in recent years, and we want to know if there's a future for Jesse Stone. Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. 9 movies, and I think still going strong. Personally, I think the last one, number 9, was as strong or as good or maybe better than any others. A lot of people did. We're now doing them for Hallmark. It's a 2-picture deal.
Right.
If I want to do another one, they have to do it.
Right.
I wrote the last one because of the timing of things with my partner Michael Bramman during the filming of Blue Bloods. Shot it in the time I was off in our hiatus, went in the editing room, edited it, and in between Blue Bloods episodes, promoted it, and I was pretty shot. What I got to find is the inspiration. It's nice to have a choice. The franchise has been too good to me to get a payday just because it's laying there for me. So it's a big thing. My partner Michael and Bramman and I are talking about it. We both became friends with Robert Parker. Michael already had a relationship with Bob Parker, who's passed on. He's the man. He's one of the few writers of novels that you can lift their dialogue and put it right on the screen. Maybe Elmore Leonard, too. Right. So we got a lot of things that are driving us to say we really got to make sure we can do another good movie. And so I don't know. Maybe in the hiatus we could film one if I got to work writing it. I don't become someone else 24 hours a day when I act, but my head's pretty much in Blue Blood, so it's very hard to switch gears.
I was going to say the process.
When I write,
when
I write, I got to make an emotional commitment to the work. I got to sit down and walk in Jesse's shoes. So that's hard to do while you're doing Frank.
But since you've written, how many of them were you involved in the
writing?
Well,
Michael and I did page 1 rewrites from the first one. I think we started getting actual credit as the sole writers in about, I don't know, 5 or 6. So we didn't have books anymore.
Right. Well, so you clearly have made a connection with this character, and he's
I love him.
And one of the people in the audience.
He's a mess.
Yeah.
He's in the same business as Frank Reagan, but he ain't Frank Reagan.
Exactly.
I always figure one of these days he might end up in jail. He is, as described in one show, the head of the town council says, you're like a small town sheriff making up your own rules. And he said, you mean like Gene Hackman in The Unforgiven? And he says to the guy, he's very arrogant, Jesse. He says, I'd prefer you think of me as a benevolent Gene Hackman.
Right.
But it does. He's a sheriff in a small, it's in that sense of Western concept, as most shows are, and he makes up his own rules. He has his own sense of justice, which is pretty dark.
Well, you know, the networks are pretty much, the broadcast networks are pretty much gone out of the movie business, so you moved it to cable, but you still have a connection with it. This character is,
Yeah,
and the tone of the movies are so different than what you normally see on TV as well. I love the tone of the movies.
Look, we were the last, I'm proud to say, network movie of the week. First, we were part of their movie of the week thing, and then that went away, but they had their Hallmark Hall of Fames and us, and then they let those go, and the way it started, without making it a long story, you want to know? I mean, I had this book. CBS says we want to do a movie, so I met with Les, who's an old pal. We were in acting class together. He doesn't like when I remind him of that. And we pitched this. He goes, yeah. And I said, well, you know, it's a series of books, Les. They wanted a movie. And then I got into the process where most television networks, and most of the time, executive produce all their movies. So that's where the sameness comes from. And I asked for and got script approval. And I remember the first note session, I was on the phone, and they said, we want you to do this, 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 and this. And I said, no. And they said, who do you think you are? I said, I'm the guy you gave script approval. And they did not like the Jesse Stone. When we delivered it, we got 5 pages of notes. They said, do this, this, and this. We went, no. Yeah. So we took a risk, big risk.
Right.
It is not a typical network movie. We aired in between Spring Break, Shark Attack, and Category 7 End of the World on CBS. So it obviously paid off by then they gave us a 2-picture deal when it was a top 10 show. It's been a top 10 show almost every time it ran, including movie number 8, which they didn't want to do anymore. So.
Well, I respect how quiet the tone is of it. It's so different than regular television, and we always respond to that. I've got another question from the audience as we have to start to wind this thing down. I'm sorry to say, but Amy wants to know: in your vast and varied career, is there a certain type of character you have not yet played and would like to?
You know, I don't have that kind of list. I really don't. I'd love to do another Western. It just became a part of me when I did a mini-series called The Sacketts, and I just said, you know, to take a line out of Quigley Down Under that my friend, the late Alan Rickman, said, maybe I was born in the wrong century. But I love Westerns. I'd love to get back on a horse again. Other than that, I don't know. My job is to read somebody else's work most of the time, and that's certainly what I did in Jesse even. I read Bob Parker's work and see if I fit in. When you get in those deals, and I've had them, where you sign the deal and they announce the deal and the deal precedes the material, I've never had any success with that. I've had some failures with that because it's backwards. I said that emphatically, didn't I? I don't know where that came from, but it is. Then it becomes, what do you want to do? Mm-hmm. And now you're not the guy reading somebody else's heartfelt material where you go, I can fit in here, or I don't belong there.
Well, do you feel, just looking at the industry as a whole now, how the industry is so changing nowadays, that there are more opportunities, there are more platforms? Do you look at places like Netflix, Amazon, all of that as like possible opportunities for the future?
I do. I mean, Jesse, he's such a dark character. We give those shows in a sense of film noir style an edge. Mm-hmm. It'd be fun to be able to have more edge.
Yeah, for sure. Do you binge watch at all? Is that
I don't. You know, I'm turning into a certified Luddite, and I don't know. I'm pretty old now, but I'm discovering. You know, I finally went to the theater for the first time in 7 years. I work a lot when I'm back here so I can get home to see the family and see my ranch. But it was Jilly and my anniversary, and she's in LA running the ranch. So I don't know, a month ago, right the week it opened, I met my wife in Cats.
oh my gosh.
I saw it 8.5 times in London for a very specific reason.
That is true love.
And so on the 6th, my anniversary is the 7th of August. On the 6th of August, I went to Cats on a matinee. And,
That's
you know, it's a lot of memories for me. I miss Jilly up there, but she's home, and I'll see her Sunday.
So you're still making the commute?
I make the commute every 2 weeks. I hate the flight. I'm an expert. I know all the seat positions, you know, because they don't fit. I'm 6'4", and it just doesn't work out. But it's worth it. They compress my work. I work about 4 days an episode, so they put me in the last 4 of one and the first 4 of the next, which Leonard promised me and did, and because the show belongs in New York. I should say something about this cast that I love.
Sure, please.
All 4 of the primary Reagan family relocated to New York because that's where they thought this show belonged.
Well,
Jamie,
great. And,
Donnie, Bridget, and me.
well, we're happy to have you here, and we're thankful that you came tonight. I think that we've hit our limit, but thanks so much for your questions, and thank you for being here, Tom. Thank you.